I think it's just the understanding that technology and humanity don't have to be at odds with one another. That if you thoughtfully design technology and integrate it within the flow of human work, that it can be really, really effective, which is why I, again, love artificial intelligence. There's lots of scuttlebutt out there regarding AI as a precursor to massive job loss and to other, automation activities. And that may be partially true, but I also take a different attack, which I'm more of the belief now where organizations that empower people with AI are actually encouraging them to do their best work.
Welcome to Vibecast, the podcast that dives deep into the heartbeat of workplace culture. I'm your host, Christy Skutnik. Join me in conversations with extraordinary leaders as we unravel their experiences, both positive and negative, that have impacted workplace culture. This podcast is more than storytelling. It's about actionable insights. Are you ready to transform the vibe at your workplace? Let's go. I'm really excited to have this visionary guest today. He truly is transforming the HR landscape. Matt Burns. Matt is the driving force behind Atlas Copilot, a company on a mission to revolutionize how HR professionals, teams, and leaders operate. With a focus on generative AI, Atlas Copilot empowers organizations to unlock new value, streamline decision-making, and automate day-to-day tasks, all while upskilling and reskilling employees right in the flow of their work. Matt's journey spans various roles as an HR executive, strategy consultant, and industry analyst, helping organizations adapt, transform, and continuously improve through technology. He's also the host of the podcast, Thinking Inside the Box. Matt's belief in immersive technologies is no secret. He was the founding organizer of the Global HR Summit, the world's first enterprise conference in virtual reality, bringing together 60 global speakers and over 800 attendees. In my chat with him, we dive deep into how AI is shaping the future of work and how Atlas Copilot is paving the way for more human, efficient workplaces. Let's get into it. All right, Matt. Well, thanks for joining me today from Colombia. I'm appreciative that you've taken the time and agreed to chat with me. I think you have a lot to share on a very hot topic at the moment of AI and workplace vibes and what that means for HR and what that means for people in an organization and all of the things. Before we dive into that, I would love for you to just start off kind of building the foundation of our conversation and helping the listeners and me understand your definition of a vibe.
I love that question, by the way. I think because it's so intangible and so subjective in a world where we're trying to figure out what that would mean. To me, a vibe is something that is seen and heard, but it's hard to put your finger on, but everyone feels it. And I hope in your case, wherever we find you today, that it's a good one.
Awesome. Yes. And it's so interesting because the more I go through these conversations, the more, I have people telling me different definitions, and I have yet for somebody to put their finger on it. So I like that you just called that out and mentioned that. So I would love to understand kind of your journey in, I don't need a resume review necessarily, but just kind of your journey in HR, and that brings you to where you're at today. And more specifically, your role in creating workplace vibes, whether it's, starting a company, starting a podcast, leading a team. And if there were any defining moments along that journey that made you realize this is super important and why that was super important.
That's a lot. Let me try and unpack that. So
Yeah.
I think my background is, I don't think, atypical from a lot of HR professionals. I didn't have designs on being in this profession. I found myself into it. And once I did, I loved it. I love watching people have success. I like watching people win. I like empowering people's career paths. I like watching organizations share the benefits with employees. So for me, that's been a through line in my career. I've gone through a number of different chapters. I've been an HR business partner. I've been a director in HR, managing a center of excellence. I've been a CHRO, and then ultimately left the corporate world because I wanted to have more of an impact, which might sound odd. I worked in some big companies, but I always felt like there was a lot happening outside the four walls of these large organizations. And I really wanted to try and affect change on a broader scale. So I left the corporate world around 2018 and launched my own consulting practice and did so doing a lot of the same work that I was doing while I was in the corporate world. That means helping organizations and their HR teams think through digital transformations, technology procurement, implementation, process reengineering, a lot of strategy and stakeholder relations and change management. And really, the key theme in all that was transformation. And while at the time we wouldn't have called it vibes, that was really a measure of success. In most cases, they would bring me into the conversation because they wanted to ensure that in amongst all the other business changes that we didn't lose sight of the culture. Because ultimately every organization is the aggregate of its people. So the companies I've worked for have understood that and they've always made it a key tenet in how they think about change. So whether that was bringing a new payroll technology or rolling out a virtual reality platform, or more recently, bringing artificial intelligence to the workplace, I've always been passionate about the intersection of humanity and technology. And I've always embraced opportunities to do that. In 2020, in the throes of the pandemic, my consulting business was struggling. Most businesses weren't hiring service providers, they were very much in a preservation mode. And I decided to take the opportunity to form a partnership with Microsoft and launch a virtual reality conference. Why? I don't know. I could have made banana bread, I guess, like everybody else, but I wanted to launch a VR conference. And it was super cool at the
What was
time.
that? Tell me more about that.
Well, at the time, my bias is that regardless of how much technology proliferates, we still would prefer, in most cases, human to human interaction, especially for the more, I'll call them intimate activities, like when you hire somebody or their first day at work, when they want to talk about their benefits, they want to work through a problem in the workplace. I want there to be a human to human interface. But there's a lot of activities that occur in organizations that are very transactional. When you submit your documentation around your phone number and your scheduling, when you may submit your hours of work availability in a retail format, when you may try and figure out like where is the appropriate health and safety materials. A lot of these things can be disseminated by technology, but they've been traditionally gone human to human. But as workplaces become more dynamic, I think technology steps into the forefront and says, hey, we can take some of the load, and it's incumbent upon HR professionals and business leaders to think, okay, in a mosaic of work responsibilities, what is better suited for technology and what's better suited for humanity? Now, when I looked at that through a VR lens, I was like, okay, well, if we looked at no one wants to spend 12 hours a day in a virtual reality headset. I spent 3 straight days in one and I was dreaming in avatars for a week afterwards. So I don't recommend it. But I
Oh,
think for
wow.
small moments of time, yeah, I'm dedicated to my craft. Small moments of time, a hiring conversation, to me, it just made sense that why don't we try and see if VR can make a difference? And have you had all experience with the technology yourself?
Mhm.
Okay. So you know that when you put the headset on, within moments, you feel like you're in a more immersive environment than you were pre that environment.
Right.
And the human mind, scientifically speaking, can't tell the difference between a face-to-face interaction and a three-dimensional virtual reality interaction. Like logically, you know, but your mind will start to replicate the social cues. I mean, when I was working, it was in Microsoft's Altspace, which is no longer a platform that exists, but Altspace had hand and eye tracking. So it was funny. I would also pick up people's mannerisms and you could see how people would talk and it would mirror how they would behave in real life. And it would be interesting to see social cues play out. We brought 800 people to this conference, all in VR headsets over 3 days. And to see these avatars floating on the ground and to see just the social dynamics, it looked exactly like any other conference I've ever been to.
Really?
So for me, I was like, okay, that's interesting. Why don't we try this beyond just networking? Let's bring some panel conversations. Let's try and have some podcasts. Let's bring some workshops into the environment and see if this immersion will transfer into a better experience. I've worked predominantly in large global companies with dispersed teams. We weren't all in the same location. So for me, remote and hybrid work has been the way of the world for the last 15 years. But it always, for me, as being sometimes the person who wasn't in the office, but happened to be in the operation, I can identify with the feeling of being left out when you hear a bunch of people in the background laughing and carrying on and having a good meeting, and you're on your cell phone trying to get a signal, trying to participate as best you can. It doesn't matter how much you try, there is an inequity of access and information and inclusion, not by design, but just by, at that point, the technology limitation. Swap that out for a virtual reality headset. Now I can be in the room with you wherever I want in the world. And at the time, I was thinking that's going to be a really important distinction. I was wrong. Virtual reality still is trying to figure out where it should find its place in the market, but I still hold out hope for VR when it comes to applications like therapy and coaching, addictions treatment. And then in my own organization, virtual reality is an important part of our experience. But I think we're going to still take some years to find out whether companies will get to that place. And then most recently with the AI venture, similarly trying to find the through line between technology and people. And the fact is that there's so much information out there that we can consume. I'm a regular LinkedIn user, as I know you are. I consume research and papers and articles regularly, but I can't possibly consume all of it all of the time. I need some degree of curation. And yes, you can work with research organizations, you can work with the Gartners of the world, or you can go to your familiar sources. But at a time like now, I don't want to go to familiar sources. I want to understand what's happening beyond the familiar sources. I do want to know what's happening with McKinsey. I do want to know what Gallup thinks, but I also want to know what's happening in West Africa. And I want to know what's happening in South America. Because if anyone tells you that they have the world figured out right now, they're not telling you the truth. And I'm a believer that you need to pull disparate sources of information to be able to inform a better path forward. And for me, that's artificial intelligence. So that's really been the through line of my career is how do we use technology to create those vibes you talk about?
Yeah. Okay, I have so many questions. So 3 days in a VR headset,
Yeah.
what was that what was that for? And then you had dreams for a week after of Avatar. So, like, tell me more, and then utilizing the technology and what you learned from that, like, how did that change the way you do things today, right? Because that's an experience in and of itself that I'm sure formed some things moving forward.
So 3 days in a headset because the conference was over 3 days. We had 24 hours of programming, which means like the traditional conference, you go in at 9 o'clock, you leave at 4:30, whatever it was. But the entirety of that experience was available in virtual reality. If you weren't going to a session, you could sit in the lobby and have conversations. If you network, and there was multiple sessions occurring simultaneously. So in this world, this virtual reality world that we had, you were able to go to the keynote stage and listen to the head of mixed reality marketing for Microsoft or the inventor of virtual reality who opened our conference. Or you could sit in the lobby and talk with people who were just VR aficionados or nerds and geeks just trying to figure out how to make technology work. And when I look back at that experience, I mean, 3 days in a headset was a lot. I had to be in the environment because I was either speaking or chairing or just, as a conference organizer, just asking people how their experience was.
Sure.
I loved it. It was warm. It was very, very warm in my face most of the time, but I was able to do it from my living room. So the dress code was very relaxed otherwise. I had access to lots of great snacks because I knew it was going to be kind of a challenge. And honestly, I loved the experience because to me, it put me in a room with a bunch of people that I would otherwise never have had a chance to meet, that were all really excited about the idea of using technology to bring people together. It's like you found your tribe. And that for me was really reinforcing. I think what I'm most proud of looking back on that event is of the 60 speakers, we had 60 speakers that we sent VR headsets to, that we trained how to use VR, that we put in the environment. It was a lot. Of the 60 speakers, I think 20 of them went on to bring virtual reality in some capacity back into their organizations, either for hiring or for team meetings or for management offsites, whatever they wanted to do, they would bring it in some way, shape, or form. But ultimately, as I mentioned before, the market wasn't, and I don't think still is ready for that kind of environment. I think we see this push to get people back to the office, right or wrong. I think that is the solution to the problem that I think is also solved for with virtual reality. To me, a really compelling argument beyond just the cry for all other introverts out there is that not everyone can come to every meeting. And whether that's a function of cost or disability or distance, the reality is it's harder to come together now, even though we're more connected than we've ever been before. So to me, virtual reality was a patch on that that would allow us to at least bridge that gap. And to me, it's infinitely more exciting than having a Zoom call or having a Teams conversation. So for me, that's where it made the most amount of sense. How it affects me now, I think it's just the understanding that technology and humanity don't have to be at odds with one another. That if you thoughtfully design technology and integrate it within the flow of human work, that it can be really, really effective, which is why I, again, love artificial intelligence. There's lots of scuttlebutt out there regarding AI as a precursor to massive job loss and to other, automation activities. And that may be partially true, but I also take a different attack, which I'm more of the belief now where organizations that empower people with AI are actually encouraging them to do their best work.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I have a general feeling that when people easily say like, "Oh, it's just gonna take jobs," like, "I'm not gonna use it. I don't wanna use it. I think it's bad," is like a bit of a cop out to change, right? Like, how do you evolve and change? We've evolved and changed over time for so long, and now all of a sudden we're not gonna, right? Because it's gonna take jobs. Like, that's happened before. So we should embrace it and see how it can enhance and impact for good, right? Okay, I have a question about in this virtual world. So you talked a lot about like the intimacy of human connection, right? And then technology not having that intimacy. And I think that's a great point. Super valid because there are moments that matter where the intimacy matters, right? So how were you able to so you could recreate it in the moment through a virtual conference, but how do you create the lasting intimacy, I guess you could say, of that human connection post-conference?
It's a great question, and we weren't successful in doing it. So I learned the right and the wrong way. I think in an organizational setting, the way I'd recommend using it is as you would journey map any employee experience today, and you would figure out all those, as you mentioned, moments that matter. I would look at them in the context of technology and culture, and look at them on two different parallel lines, and ask yourself at each inflection point, where is the employee best served? Technology, human connection, or maybe a combination of both. I'll give you a couple of examples. As I mentioned, that final job offer. I don't want a chat bot to message me on my phone and text me with a job offer. I would rather have somebody call me. Call me old fashioned, but I want to know that people really want me to be part of their team. I want to feel like I'm joining an organization that's tightly knit. At this point, I don't want my boss to be an AI bot. Maybe if I was doing a project or it was very much like a piece type of work or I was one of many contributors to a broader project, different. But if I'm joining an organization, I want that interaction. Now, at the same time, I as a candidate, as an employee, would like as much personalization as is practical. And traditionally, personalization just was not practical in an HR setting because we weren't resourced to provide it. You generally had to, in my case in retail, provide a consistent experience to tens of thousands of employees, but it wasn't optimized to any one particular employee type. It was meant to be compliant and consistent. And we would make incremental changes to improve the overall experience, but we weren't really honing in on segmentation of groups like you would see with like marketing, for example. So I think with AI specifically, you get the opportunity to look at that route and you can use personalization on things like curating company information and creating a chat interface with the company information and the candidate to learn more about the organization. You can map somebody's experience day by day and determine when's the appropriate time to send them their benefits enrollment information, as opposed to on the day one in a stack of papers that they're going to fill out that they're not going to see for 6 months, which was optimized for administrators, but never for the individual employee. But now we could do things like, well, we know the best day is day 18. We send them an email with their benefits information with an electronic signature. It's completed. They're doing one thing that day. They're not filling out 47 forms. Another example would be learning pathways. You can, as a artificial intelligence system, understand an individual learner's current level of knowledge and aptitude on any number of measures. And then the learning pathway can curate an experience of content and experiences and knowledge for the individual to ensure that they get to the place they need to get to the best way for them. Maybe they're a visual learner, here's a bunch of videos. Maybe they're an audio learner, here's a bunch of podcasts. Maybe they're a practical learner, okay, here's a couple of assignments and you need your reports on them. But we can do that now at scale using AI because it allows us to get individual experiences based on that individual's behavior. Before we just couldn't do it. So for me, overlaying that lens, where's those moments that matter? Should we use technology? Should we not? I think is a really important activity. And it's one that I take now with organizations. We think about that a lot more than we did before.
And if we look at it from the perspective of the impact that we can make on the person versus like, oh, what's easier or most scalable for me, like it just changes the conversation, right? It's like if we can deliver personalized experiences to each employee within an organization, we're not just impacting their experience at work, we're impacting the whole human of who they are, how they interact with people outside of the workplace, how they interact with their family, their kids, their spouse, whoever, right? And how they're going about life. So this is a bigger conversation than just like what's happening in that individual company for that individual person. It's like kind of mind blowing for me and really awesome at the same time.
And scary for some of our peers. Like some of our peers hear this and go, we're not resourced to provide personalized experiences for employees. We don't have the technology to make that happen. And part of that, to your earlier point, is they haven't figured out for themselves how to make that happen. So it's much easier to resist the change or tell people why it won't work than it is to deconstruct what you may need to change as an individual to bring it into the workplace. 2 years ago, nobody asked my opinion on artificial intelligence, not a single soul. And then all of a sudden, we stand up a company, we put out a couple posts, we get some clients, and all of a sudden, we're experts in AI because we're actually doing the work and we're in the businesses and we're having the conversations. We're not that far ahead. But the challenge nowadays is that you will get behind very quickly. This is not like any other HR change. My first job in HR, I was filing paper into vanilla folders into filing cabinets. Most of my bosses were baby boomers that said anything involving a computer was anti human and we should avoid them at all costs. I went through the digitization phase where we scanned everything and put it into systems. I went through the cloud piece where we wrung our hands and said, do we want the information in the cloud where we can't see it? I've been through the phase where we talked about using big data and virtual reality and other systems. And now we're in artificial intelligence, and it's the same refrain as it's been for the last 20 years I've been in the profession, which is we're putting up these arguments that are just frankly not factual. We're looking at them from our own perspective. The reality is, I'm 43 years old, so I kind of in the middle. I didn't have a cell phone in high school or college, but I got one when I get into the workforce. People younger than me are digital natives. They actually prefer, in a lot of cases, a chatbot interface than coming into the office and asking to speak to an HR business partner or to sit down in someone's desk and fill out their benefits information. They would rather have asynchronous flexibility than they want social intimacy with their colleagues. And yet, the majority of people who are making the decisions around strategy and design and programs don't look are not like them. So they try and replicate their own experience, believing that's what everybody wants. When if they would just ask people what they want, they would find it's a mosaic of information. Some people want to come to the office and sit down and have coffee with the HR BP and talk about life. And some people never want to interact with HR. They want to submit their forms and go on with their day. And that's okay in either case. We're not here to build business for HR. We're here to support the organization in achieving its goals. And that means providing as best we can a degree of frictionless support for the employee. Too often are we the people that are getting in the way of progress, either through regulations or bureaucracy. And I get it. Like, if you're a professional and you struggle to create influence in your role, the easiest thing for you to revert back to is law and order. You have to because the law says. You have to because it's a policy. And they're asserting a policy as a form of leverage and influence and persuasion, which I guess, or you could build relationships and try and have conversations with people and see if you can influence through other methods. Now, it's not always going to work. I've definitely had stakeholders where I was like, okay, we can't do this. This is illegal. Um,
Yeah.
and I always have worked really hard to engage stakeholders proactively because for me, it's pay me now or pay me later. And I would rather have the relationship well before I need it than have to try and build it while I'm in
Yes.
crisis.
Yes, absolutely. And it's, when I think about HR, it's about managing risk for the business, right? It's like, here's what the risk is. I'm not going to be the wet blanket on your business goals, but I want you to be well informed of the decisions that you potentially are going to make and what that might look like, right? So that we can have a very open conversation about the human impact, the business impact, the technology impact, the compliance impact, all of it. So a business is a whole thing, a person is a whole thing. It's not just segmented into like, you are a tactical worker to transact this thing, or this business is this business to transact this thing. It's like bigger, broader, and more than that. And I think AI brings this amazing component to be able to synthesize data so much quicker to make a really good decision on what the risk might be quicker, right? So you don't get yourself into the hot water maybe that you, or maybe you do. Maybe that's the path you choose, and so be it. That's the path you choose, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not. But yeah, I just love this idea of utilizing AI as an enhancement to what we're doing and to be able to provide unique perspectives. Like you were saying earlier, you're going to look to the Gartner and McKinsey stuff probably, and there's way more out there, which is like AI, right? There's way more out there that we can integrate into what we're already doing that's going to give a diverse perspective and maybe challenge our thinking to like, "Oh, I never thought about it that way. Or maybe this other person on my team is thinking about it that way. And I should know that if I'm going to move this business forward." So, what are you like? Okay, Atlas Copilot is your company now, right? So, tell me a little bit and maybe share a story of how it's changed the landscape of a current organization. You don't have to name the organization, but I'd love to hear like the practical application of what it's doing and the impact that it's had on vibes.
Innumerable impacts. And I think it's up to every organization to define the use cases for themselves. But I think the key is they have to define a use case. I think bringing technology of any kind, including AI, into a business without a clear plan, clear measures of success, clear alignment in the organization is a major risk, and I wouldn't recommend it. And this is somebody who's led or been part of close to 100 digital transformations. To me, AI isn't much different. It's just faster. So as a consequence, you need to also be more cautious to balance that. Now, organizations that we speak with are really looking at a few different use cases. And right now, a lot of the work that we're doing, frankly, is consulting work. Like it's not consulting in the traditional sense, but it's helping organizations wrap their heads around, okay, we have the idea, how are we going to bring it into action? So a lot of what I end up doing is working with HR teams, helping them unwrap a problem. AI is a solution to it, but it isn't the only solution. There has to be other changes that support it. I'll give you an example. One company we're working with is a large retail organization. They have about 140,000 employees, and they are spread across a large geographic area. And they're looking for diversity of thinking as to inform their HR centers of excellence. They have subscriptions to a number of publications that they use to inform best practice, but they are finding that they're looking for more. And they're looking for information that is not traditionally available to them. And they're looking for more democratization of knowledge because traditional business models with those publishing or research houses is you buy a seat, you buy two seats. Those people have privileged access. They then have to be the conduits for information for everybody else. That's going away. Information is now becoming ubiquitous and nearly free. So giving people all the agency with all of the information to look at it and to apply it in their context is really, really important. Artificial intelligence, I don't want to be the person that tells people that Santa Claus doesn't exist. It's not magic. It's math. And it's math based on probabilities. And it learns over time. Think of artificial intelligence as a really super eager intern. It never takes a day off. It never says it's too much. It never says I need a break. What it will say is, tell me what to do. And if you aren't explicitly clear on the context, it's going to give you the best that it can, but it doesn't know what it doesn't know. So organizations looking for research are often trying to pull different sources because in this problem, when they were asking their traditional large language models, they were working with one of the large language model providers. I don't need to mention the name. I think you could figure out who that might be. They were disappointed with the level of context in their retail industry environment. They were getting very generic answers, generic case law, generic best practices, which again, if you're a consultant or if you're just doing some basic research, fine. But if you're trying to solve a real business problem, you can't rely upon that application with a generic answer. With our application, because we've curated content in the context of HR and trained the large language model to be a de facto HR professional, it gets them closer to the result, but it still requires them to introduce additional context. What is the problem we're trying to solve? What are the conditions in which we're operating? What does success look like? What does the output look like? These are things that we end up sitting down with companies to say, okay, if this is the problem you're trying to solve, let's use an operational example. There's an organization that was trying to review and update all of their policy manuals. Not the most romantic work in the world, but work that has to get done. But they were struggling because they operated in 8 different countries. They had 8 different policy manuals and they had 8 different policies and all these different things duplicated, triplicated, quadruplicated. They had hundreds of policies floating around and version control was a real problem. So what we said was, okay, let's sit down and let's build an algorithm, a prompt that would allow you to do 2 things. One, ingest your current policies one by one, and then analyze those policies against best practice, what is legal, what makes sense in your organization, provide you with feedback that you could either adopt or reject, rewrite your policy, and do that. And we were able to get to a place where we were actually able to go through about 47 different policies over the course of about a 2-hour session and just knock them out one after another, after another, after another. Because once we understood the context we're operating in, the core values of the company, the laws and regulations of the countries we're operating in, once we had all that stuff inputted, we just simply gave the large language model instructions. Okay, here's another policy. Make sure this is the same thing. Here's another policy. This is the same thing. Here's another policy. And then most of the work took on the back end. We had a group of people that, as we were producing these draft policies, their job was to review them. So they would spend 10 to 15 minutes reviewing. And then the ones they were more sensitive about, they would send to their legal counsel for a final review. And the whole activity was done over the course of about 36 hours, where normally they were thinking it was going to be an 8 to 12-week project.
Oh my
So
word.
that's one very,
Not to mention the cost, right? Like,
and the resource constraint. Like, do you want your corporate
wow.
counsel spending all that time
Yeah.
either billing you to check forms and like write policies? Like, oh,
Also, nobody wants to do that. I don't care how much you say you love reading and redacting and changing and updating.
no,
No.
no one wants to. But it has to get done. And
It
that's why
does.
it was the way that it was, because nobody wanted to touch it, because they knew when they touched it, they had to do all of it. And nobody wanted to do all of it. And because we're also talking about different languages. So at the same time, we're translating these documents into, okay, well, we have a company unit in Japan. Turn this policy now into Japanese. So we have to do that. So like we're doing all this in real time. That's a very, very simple application, but it gives you a sense of when you understand the business problem you're trying to solve, when you introduce the right context, and you have the right human in the loop in the process, AI becomes a force multiplier. And now they're looking at this being a twice annual activity to make sure they're constantly compliant with these laws. Whereas before, they probably hadn't checked these in 3 or 4 years. So now this becomes an accelerated activity that becomes kind of fun, kind of like a bit of a team, almost like a bit of a hackathon, if you will, as opposed to being this forced march over 8 weeks.
Yeah. And you know what I'm getting from all of this? Like, then the work for the individual becomes more fun, right? Like, there's more joy in what you get to do versus have to do. And maybe there's more days you say I get to do this versus I have to do this. And gosh, what a mindset shift for the individual, for the workplace, on an aggregate for the organization, because if more people are saying I get to do this, there's just a general elevated vibe because of that mindset shift. And that's incredible from one thing.
Well, and now that we're talking about this, I'm going to write an article now that I think about this, which is
Yeah.
each of us at this point are able to define our interaction with artificial intelligence as we see it. I think of artificial intelligence as a thinking companion. So I use it as a sounding board. I use it as a sanity check on certain things. But I could see it as an assistant. I could be like, well, I'm just going to give you instructions and you're going to do what I want you to do. I don't think either is inappropriate. I think it's how you contextualize your relationship with that particular thing. And I think that creates a degree of empowerment, because I think it's easier to work in partnership, even if your partner's a digital partner, than it is to feel like you're doing it on your own. Even for the people who are deeply introverted and don't want to be in crowds of people, the idea of having just a trusted sounding board is a nice comfort blanket in addition to having that support with you. So I think AI, among other technologies, can be part of the vibes conversation. But again, it goes all go back to how intentionally you're deploying it. Are you co-creating with your employees? Are you forcing it down through the organization and change? How are you approaching it? Because there's ways to do this right and there's ways to do this not right. And I think every company's have to wrestle with that.
Yeah. And it really goes back to what's the experience that you're creating as you're implementing it, right? And the change management process that you're going through in order to use it as a tool and a resource and something that can really, again, enhance what you're already doing versus and changing the minds of people, right? Like, you have to change a belief system to some degree to change a behavior within an organization. And so people are going to come packed with different beliefs. And if you can change the way they think about AI in the workspace, then you can change the behavior and the context in which they use it. But if you don't start at the root of it, to your point, you're going to be climbing up a very steep hill for a very long time because you haven't done the hard work up front and in that intimate experience in order for the belief to change about what you're about to implement. And that goes for any technology or any new thing that you're going to do in the workplace.
But
But
especially this one.
but especially this one because there's lots of things filling people's mind about what it is or isn't or what it's going to do for them, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're all looking to ourselves to say, okay, what's in it for me and how's it going to impact my life? I mean, there's a component of that for every single human being, right? So if we can start with that and make sure that there's this belief that like it's going to help you personally, professionally, in relationship, in the way you think, in the way you show up, then I think we can get there. But yeah, you're totally right. The hard work has to be done up front before you can just say, "Go use AI." Yeah, it's going to be great. And it sounds like that's the work that you guys are doing at Atlas, right? Is like, let's do the hard work up front. So when you're actually utilizing this tool, you see its benefit to you, to the organization as a whole, and how you can apply it over and over again in different contextual situations so that it can be that resource to you. It can make you guys shine. It doesn't have to be a replacement, it's an enhancement.
Which is why I think they call us, because we're HR professionals by trade. Like, I'm not a technologist. I don't write code. I've never been a software founder before. This is all new for me too. And I think that creates a level of we're on the same team. I've worn the jersey. I know the challenges. I don't know their challenge specifically, but I know of the challenges. And I've certainly been in my share of great workplaces and not so great workplaces. And I've seen organizations thrive and struggle. And we really try and translate the technology into terminology and context that they can relate to, because ultimately they're the ones that has to adopt it and then ultimately evangelize it internally. But if we're not solving their problems, they're not going to do either. So what we're focusing in on is really just helping them understand how can we have the biggest impact. And I worked in a lot of organizations that were very cost conscious, to be kind. And as a consequence, I got really good at building business cases that were aggressive insofar as they would usually fund themselves in the same fiscal year we do the project, because that was kind of the requirement. So I've gotten very good at being able to go through an organization and go, okay, where can we find the biggest leverage points for efficiencies and savings? And then how do we reinvest those savings back into the organization so we can make the workplace better? Sure, we can make things more productive. Yes, we can grow our bottom line. And we can also segment a portion of that into the workplace to reinvest. Again, it's one of the reasons why I love AI, because you don't have to choose. I don't have to choose between more efficient and better for the employees. I have to be thoughtful about including both.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Okay, so with all of this, right? And it can be overwhelming to some, like, where do I even start? And so, what I always love to give listeners of this podcast is like a place to start. And that means like based on all of your experience, your thoughts, all of the things that you've done in your life and the place that you come from. What's one thing, and it can be two, but really, truly, what's one thing people can walk away with after they listen to this to just start to move the needle 1%? That doesn't require a committee or a big budget or anything like that. But what can they go do once they stop this podcast and start improving the vibe?
My first mentor in HR, I was in a 12-month maternity leave HR business partner replacement role. So I didn't even know if I was going to be in the profession very long. But at the time, my mentor was phenomenal about investing in me, investing in my growth, and rounding out a lot of the rough edges that I brought into the role for the first time. And one thing that will always stick with me is when she would say things to the effect of, Matt, always chase experiences and opportunities. The salaries and titles will sort themselves out. And that for me has been a guiding principle throughout my career. For the individual listening right now, get curious. And however that looks for you, whatever your preferred modality is to get curious. I love to listen to podcasts and watch YouTube videos, and I like to experiment myself with large language models. I've taught myself how to be a prompt engineer. I've taught myself how to understand the implications of AI with HR, because I needed to run a software company, but because also I was curious about the business. But no one had to tell me to do that. I knew that I needed to do that to be able to be of service and to be of value to people. And whether I'm right or wrong, my belief is that my place in this weird world that we live in is to be a little bit ahead of everybody else, to kind of plow the path that's more uncomfortable, so that when people come behind, it's a little bit more, the path is worn, that the heavy lifting has been somewhat done, that we can provide clarity on mistakes that we've made so that you don't have to make them again. We have a fearlessness to us that I really, really appreciate, because I think right now you have to be a little bit fearless, understanding that you're taking a leap of faith in the same way I took a leap of faith in launching a virtual reality conference, which wasn't ultimately commercially successful, but I learned a ton in the process. So for me, that's a win. an artificial intelligence company, we made a lot of mistakes in the first year of our business that will make us stronger years going forward. So I think for people, it's the curiosity, and in two words, just start. Like, just
Yeah,
start, just do
just
something,
start.
start
Yeah.
something, and just get curious and work that path, and it will become easier. And if it's pull, not push, it will feel more empowering. So pull on the thread and see where it takes you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. And is there any one particular question that people are just like, okay, get curious. Yeah, what does that mean? One particular question that you always like to ask, or that leads you to the next question, to the next question, to the next question of just like continual curiosity?
How can artificial intelligence best serve the people that I work with?
Ah, amazing. Thank you so much, Matt. I think this was like a very enlightening, at least for me personally, enlightening conversation of like what the world of work in HR looks like in the future. And you don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers, but at least again, getting us curious enough to start thinking what question to ask next. So thank you so much for spending your Friday afternoon with me. It's very thoughtful and I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Wow. What an eye opening and phenomenal conversation with Matt. As he mentions, we have to remember a vibe may be intangible, but it's felt by everyone. And as we navigate the future of work, we empower people, we have to embrace change, and we have to balance technology with human connection. That is truly the key. And HR's role in this is to build relationships, understand the diverse needs, and create personalized experiences that lead to growth and satisfaction. AI and tech are tools to support, not replace, our human touch. So let's stay curious, adaptable, and open to change. Because when we start small and stay engaged, the impact over time is enormous. Until next time, keep vibing, my friends. If this episode inspired you and you want to see how you can take the next step to creating a better vibe within your organization, I'd love for you to download our complimentary 75 Vibes worksheet. This is a simple tool to create a habit and mindset around creating great vibes in work and life. The best part, it's simple and it works.